Hello friends again, welcome back to Shadows of Revenge. First at all tell me, where are you from the world watching my video? This is a true story, so watch till end. My name is Robert Chen. I never imagined Easter would taste like iron. Not wine, not rosemary, not the sweetness of chocolate melting in a child's palm. Iron, the kind that coats your tongue when blood slips from a wound you didn't see coming. If you've ever mistaken politeness for love, stay with me. Easter Sunday began the way traditions are supposed to begin. Quiet, deliberate, almost sacred. Robert Chin stood in his kitchen in North Vancouver, carving into a leg of lamb that had been marinating since dawn. Garlic clung to the air. Rosemary drifted through the hallways. The windows were cracked open, just enough to let in the crisp spring breeze. It carried the distant hum of Teslas gliding through a neighborhood that hadn't always looked like this. When Robert and Sarah bought the house in 1992, it had been modest, affordable, a young couple stretch, $170,000, 3 bedrooms, a narrow driveway, a maple tree in the yard that Sarah insisted gave the place character. Now the house was worth nearly $2 million. The maple tree was taller, the street was louder, and Sarah was gone. 5 years gone. Cancer had taken her quietly, methodically. Robert still sometimes reached for her in bed before remembering that grief doesn't move when you ask it to. He adjusted the oven dial and checked the thermometer again. Perfect. Upstairs, 2 empty bedrooms held silence like stored air. They had once held toys. Later, textbooks. Later still, nothing but dust and memory. His son Daniel lived an hour away in Langley. Pharmaceutical sales. Married. 2 kids. Emma and Lucas. 8 and 6. They visited once a month if traffic behaved. Robert hosted the holidays. Always had. It felt like honoring Sarah. At exactly 3:02 p.m., a white Tesla eased into the driveway. Robert watched from the kitchen window. Daniel stepped out first, tall, well-dressed, phone in hand, even before the car door fully shut. Brittany followed, her movements precise, controlled. She carried a bottle of wine that caught the sunlight in a deliberate flash. Expensive. Brittany only brought expensive things when she wanted something. Robert had learned that detail the hard way. The kids burst out laughing before the front door even opened. That sound, that was real. That was pure. Daniel entered first. Dad. A quick hug. Stiff. Efficient. The kind that checks a box. House looks great. Thanks, son. Emma and Lucas rushed in, colliding into Robert's legs. They smelled like outside air and chocolate. They showed him their Easter baskets, told him about the egg hunt at school, spoke over each other with the urgency only children possess. Robert laughed. That part still worked. Being a grandfather still worked. Brittany leaned in and kissed his cheek. Her perfume arrived before she did. Robert, thank you for hosting. This is from Okanagan. It's supposed to be exceptional. She placed the wine on the counter like a pawn being advanced across a chessboard. You didn't have to, Robert said. Oh, I insist. The smile reached her lips, not her eyes. They settled into the living room. The good china waited in the dining room. Sarah's china. Daniel noticed, but didn't comment. Instead, he sat forward, focused, present. That was unusual. Daniel never lingered in conversations. He usually half-listened while scanning emails. Today, his phone lay face down on the coffee table. He kept glancing at Brittany. A silent coordination. Robert felt it then. Not danger exactly, but choreography. So, Dad, Daniel began carefully, Brittany and I have been talking about your situation. My situation. Robert leaned back in his armchair. Which is? You living here alone? Brittany said quickly. This house is big. A lot to maintain. I manage. But you're getting older. There was. Not shouted. Not cruel. Just positioned. We worry, Daniel added. False. Emergencies. What if something happens and no one's here? Robert's expression didn't change. I have a phone. Neighbors. I'm not stranded on an island. Daniel inhaled slowly. A salesman preparing to close. We have a proposal. The word landed heavier than it should have. Brittany leaned forward, elbows on her knees. My parents just retired. Sold their place in Kamloops. They're looking in the lower mainland, but the market is insane. Robert nodded once. And you have 2 empty bedrooms, she continued. What if they moved in? They pay rent. They could help you around the house. Keep you company. It makes sense for everyone. The room grew still. You want your parents to move into my house. It's perfect, Brittany said. You wouldn't be alone. My mom was a nurse. My dad's incredibly handy. It would be like built-in support. Daniel added softly, It's practical, Dad. Practical. The word tasted clinical. The oven timer rang. Robert stood immediately. Let me check on dinner. In the kitchen, he closed his eyes for 5 full seconds. This was it. Exactly what Richard Thompson had warned him about. 3 months earlier, his financial advisor had called. Someone had tried to access his investment accounts. They'd used personal information, birth date, Sarah's maiden name, his mother's maiden name. The attempt had come from Daniel's IP address. Robert hadn't confronted him. Instead, he had called Thompson. And over coffee at a Tim Hortons near the lawyer's office, Thompson had said something Robert would never forget. I see this pattern weekly. Adult children testing boundaries, accessing accounts, suggesting living arrangements, then escalating. So they prepared. Cognitive assessment, pristine results. Updated will, airtight. Living trust, structured. Hidden cameras, living room, dining room, kitchen. Eventually, Thompson had said, they'll reveal their intentions. Robert returned to the table, carrying the lamb. Dinner began pleasantly. Children talking, cutlery clinking, compliments offered. Then Daniel circled back. So, Dad, about the proposal. Robert set down his fork. I've thought about it. Brittany's eyes brightened slightly. I'm not interested. Silence. What? She said, smiling too tightly. I don't want roommates. They're family. I've met them twice. Daniel's jaw tightened. You have all this space, Brittany pressed. What are you even using it for? That's my business. Daniel leaned in. Be reasonable. You're 63. The number hung in the air like an accusation. And what happens at 70? 75? When that comes, Robert replied calmly, I'll decide. Brittany laughed sharply. Retirement communities cost a fortune. Why pay strangers when family could be here? Because it's my house. Emma looked up, sensing tension. Lucas remained absorbed in chocolate. Kids, Robert said gently, why don't you watch something in the living room? They left quickly. Once they were gone, the temperature shifted. This is unbelievable, Daniel muttered. Brittany's face flushed. Do you know our mortgage payment? Childcare. We're drowning. And I'm sorry for that, Robert said. But it's not solved by moving into my home. You're hoarding space, she snapped. Sitting in a $2 million house alone like some feudal lord. The word struck like a slap. Sarah's been gone 5 years, she added coldly. When do you move on? That one pierced. But Robert did not flinch. Give me one good reason, Brittany demanded, leaning across the table. Why my parents can't move in. Robert met her eyes. Because I don't want them to. Simple, clear, final. And in that moment, something in Brittany's face cracked. Her hand shot toward the wine glass. Time slowed. Red liquid arced through the air. It struck his face, cold, sticky, staining his shirt, splashing the wall. The glass shattered against the table's edge. A shard sliced his eyebrow. Warmth slid down his temple. Silence. Brittany stood, breathing hard, eyes wild. Daniel froze. Robert touched his forehead. His fingers came away red. Not wine. Blood. And in that instant, he understood something with terrifying clarity. This had never been about help. It had been about access. He rose slowly. I think, he said quietly, I need to go to the hospital. The house that had once been built on love now stood filled with something else entirely. And the cameras were recording every second. The blood ran warmer than the wine. It slid down Robert's temple, along the curve of his cheek, dripping onto the collar Sarah had once ironed with such quiet care. For a moment, no one moved. The room stood suspended in a fragile stillness, like a photograph seconds before it burns. Brittany's chest rose and fell rapidly. Shock was beginning to replace fury in her eyes. Daniel's mouth opened, then closed. He looked less like a husband and more like a boy who had just watched something irreversible unfold. Robert felt no urge to shout, no urge to retaliate. What he felt instead was confirmation. Slowly, he reached for his napkin and pressed it against his eyebrow. It bloomed red almost instantly. I think, he said, his voice steady enough to surprise even himself, I need medical attention. Dad, I'm so sorry. Daniel rushed out. She didn't mean. Yes, Robert interrupted softly. She did. The words landed with surgical precision. He walked to the bathroom without waiting for permission, without looking back. In the mirror, he saw the full image. Streaks of wine across his forehead like war paint. A thin cut split just beneath his brow. Blood mingling with Cabernet in an almost artistic smear. Easter dinner. He laughed once under his breath. Not from humor. From clarity. He pressed a towel against the wound and returned to the dining room. Brittany had begun crying now. A small, trembling performance that might have been convincing, if not for the glass still glittering on the hardwood floor. The children's cartoon laughter echoed faintly from the living room. Thank God they hadn't seen it. Please leave, Robert said calmly. Take the kids home. Let's just talk about this, Daniel pleaded. There is nothing to discuss. Your wife assaulted me. I'm going to the hospital. You are leaving my house. The authority in his tone was unfamiliar to them, perhaps even to himself. He grabbed his keys. Daniel stepped forward slightly, as if debating whether to block the door. He didn't. Good. Robert stepped into the cool spring air. The evening light had softened into gold, the maple tree casting long shadows across the driveway. The Tesla sat gleaming, untouched by what had just happened inside. He got in his car, closed the door, and allowed one single breath to leave his lungs. Then he drove. At the first red light, he pulled out his phone and typed 4 words. Phase 1 is complete. He sent it to Richard Thompson. The reply came within 30 seconds. On my way. Document everything. Do not speak to Daniel. Robert set the phone down. Lionsgate Hospital was busy, but manageable. A nurse ushered him through triage quickly once she saw the blood. Wine, she asked gently as she cleaned the cut. In glass, Robert replied. Accident. He met her eyes. No. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Thompson arrived before Robert was fully stitched. The lawyer still wore his brown leather shoes and that calm, analytical expression that never quite left his face. Well, Thompson said quietly, studying the wound. They escalated faster than I expected. Robert recounted everything in careful detail. The proposal, the insistence, the word selfish, the glass. Thompson typed notes rapidly into his phone. And the cameras? He asked. They saw it all. A small nod. Good. There was a pause. A crossroads. Do you want to press charges? Robert stared at the sterile, white wall across from him. He had imagined this moment during the quiet planning sessions over coffee. They had spoken hypothetically. If there's violence, if there's coercion, if they push too far. Now it wasn't hypothetical. Yes, he said. Thompson did not look surprised. I'll contact the RCMP. The officers arrived within the hour. 1 male constable, 1 female sergeant. Professional, detached, efficient. They photographed his injury, collected his wine-stained shirt into an evidence bag, asked precise questions. Did she throw the glass at you intentionally? Yes. Was there any provocation? No. Has there been prior tension? Robert hesitated only long enough to remain truthful. Yes. He described the attempted access to his financial accounts, the IP address trace, the suggestion of cognitive decline. The female sergeant's expression shifted slightly at that. You're over 60, she said, and she's a family member. Elder abuse statutes may apply. Elder abuse. The phrase felt heavy, not because it was inaccurate, but because it confirmed what he had refused to name out loud. A doctor sealed the cut with liquid stitches. Minor injury. No concussion. He was discharged just after 8 in the evening. Thompson drove him home. The house greeted them in silence. No Tesla. No Daniel pacing the porch. Just darkness behind the windows and the faint scent of extinguished candles lingering in the air. They entered together. Let's see it, Thompson said. Robert led him into the small office, just off the hallway. He opened the security system on his computer. 4 camera angles appeared on the screen. Living room, dining room, kitchen, front entry. They watched. From the first polite suggestion to the tightening of Brittany's jaw. From Daniel's rehearsed logic to the moment the wine arced through the air. It was clear, unprovoked, undeniable. Thompson leaned back in his chair. This, he said quietly, is gold. Robert did not feel victorious. He felt resolved. What happens now? He asked. She'll be charged. Likely assault with a weapon. The glass qualifies. Given your age and the financial context, the court will look at it seriously. And Daniel? Thompson folded his hands. Daniel didn't throw the glass. But the bigger pattern, the account access attempt, the pressure to move people in, the talk of cognitive decline, that's concerning. You think they were building towards something? I know the pattern, Thompson replied. Establish residency in the home. Push for power of attorney. Argue diminished capacity. Gain control of assets. Robert's stomach tightened. My son, your daughter-in-law, is the engine. Your son is susceptible. Silence stretched between them. Then we go forward, Robert said finally. Thompson nodded once. The financial exploitation complaint will be filed tomorrow. We strengthen the will. And you consider setting up independent trusts for the grandchildren. That pierced deeper than the cut on his forehead. The kids aren't part of this. Then protect them separately. Robert nodded slowly. By 10 o'clock, Thompson left. The house felt different now. Not empty. Exposed. Robert sat alone in the living room. The pastel decorations looked absurd in the lamplight. Paper eggs taped to the windows. A ceramic bunny Sarah had once insisted was charming. His phone buzzed. Daniel. He let it ring. Then again. Voicemail. A text followed. Dad, please. Brittany feels terrible. We need to fix this. Fix this. Robert stared at the message for a long time before powering his phone off entirely. Upstairs, the two empty bedrooms waited quietly. Downstairs, the cameras continued to blink red in the dark. He walked to the front door and checked the lock. Then the back door. Then each window. Not from fear. From discipline. Because something fundamental had shifted tonight. He had not overreacted. He had not been dramatic. He had responded. And for the first time since Sarah died, he felt something close to control returning to his life. He touched the bandage above his eye. The wound would heal. But the illusion would not. Some lines, once crossed, never uncross. And somewhere in Langley, Daniel and Brittany were beginning to understand that Easter dinner had not ended in chaos. It had triggered consequences. Consequences never arrive loudly. They don't kick down doors or shatter windows. They arrive in paperwork, in silence, in the sound of a phone ringing 16 times and going unanswered. By Monday morning, Brittany was formally charged. The call came just after 9. Robert was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing a coffee mug, when the police informed him she had been released under conditions. No contact, surrender of passport, mandatory court appearance. The voice on the other end was calm, procedural. The machine of law had begun moving. He thanked the officer and hung up. The house felt steady around him, unmoved, as if the walls themselves approved. By noon, Daniel had called Thompson's office 16 times. 16. Robert didn't need to see the call log to imagine it. Panic disguised as persistence. Control slipping through his fingers. Thompson didn't answer. On Tuesday, the financial complaint was filed. The bank froze Robert's accounts temporarily during the investigation. An inconvenience, yes, but a necessary one. They needed confirmation that he had not been the one attempting access months earlier. He hadn't. At the exact time the login attempt had occurred, Robert had been at a dentist appointment. There were records, a receipt, a time-stamped parking slip. Proof. That word mattered now more than ever. By Wednesday, the RCMP had interviewed Daniel. According to Thompson's contact inside the department, Daniel admitted to attempting to log into his father's investment accounts. I was just checking on his financial health, he had said. Checking. As if Robert were an appliance needing inspection. As if concern justified intrusion. He's getting older, Daniel had added. I was worried about cognitive decline. That phrase traveled like poison through Robert's veins when Thompson related. Cognitive decline. It wasn't just an excuse. It was groundwork. They hadn't been asking for spare bedrooms. They had been building a case. On Thursday, Robert and Thompson stood before a judge. The courtroom smelled faintly of paper and polish. Brittany wasn't present. Her lawyer was. The video footage was presented. It did not blink. It did not exaggerate. It showed. Brittany leaning forward. Her voice rising. The glass lifting. The arc. The impact. Robert remaining seated. The judge watched without expression. When it ended, he didn't deliberate long. Restraining order granted. Brittany was to remain at least 100 meters away from Robert and his property. No contact. No exceptions. Daniel could visit. Technically. But only with 48 hours written notice and only during daylight hours. Conditions. Rules. Boundaries formalized in ink. On Friday afternoon, The doorbell rang. Robert didn't move immediately. He checked the security camera feed from his phone. Daniel stood alone on the porch, unshaven, hollow-eyed. His shoulders slumped as if gravity had increased around him. Robert opened the door, but kept the threshold intact. "Dad," Daniel said, his voice frayed. "Please, can we talk? Your notice period hasn't passed." Daniel winced. "I'm your son, and I have a restraining order against your wife." A pause. "She's sorry," Daniel said. "She was stressed. She'd been drinking. It was a mistake." Robert studied him carefully. "She meant it." "No, she meant it," Robert repeated. Daniel's gaze dropped to the porch boards. "I tried to stop her. Not hard enough." The words were not shouted. They were measured. Daniel looked up again, frustration flickering. "You're blowing this out of proportion." Robert reached into his jacket pocket and removed a folded document. He handed it across the threshold. Daniel opened it slowly. The cognitive assessment. Perfect scores. Stamped and signed. "I'm not impaired," Robert said quietly. "I'm not confused. I'm not vulnerable. And I am not unaware." Daniel swallowed. "We were just trying to help. You attempted to access my accounts. I was checking on you. You suggested I might be mentally declining. I was concerned. You were preparing." Daniel's face tightened. "For what?" he demanded. "For control." The word hung between them like a blade. Daniel stepped back slightly, as if physical distance could dilute truth. "You're paranoid." "No," Robert said calmly. "I am informed." He held Daniel's gaze. "I've updated my will." Daniel's breathing shifted. "You're still included," Robert continued, "but only if you respect my boundaries. Any attempt to contest it, any attempt to claim incapacity, any legal maneuver to interfere with my autonomy." He let the sentence finish itself. "You get nothing." Daniel's lips parted, but no sound emerged. "There's an education trust for Emma and Lucas," Robert added. "Managed independently. They will be provided for when they turn 25. A flicker of something. Anger? Fear? Calculation? Crossed Daniel's face. "You cut me off. You try to cut me open first," Robert replied evenly. Silence fell heavily over the porch. Then Daniel said the thing that revealed everything. "Brittany's parents lost their rental deposit because of this. We were counting on living here. We, not they, not her parents. We." Robert felt something settle inside him. Not rage, not grief. Clarity. "You were counting on living here," he repeated softly. Daniel didn't deny it. The Tesla gleamed behind him, untouched by financial ruin. "Get off my property," Robert said. "Dad." 48 hours notice in writing. Through Thompson's office. He stepped back and closed the door. Through the window, he watched Daniel stand there for nearly 3 minutes. Motionless. Processing. Then he walked to his car. The engine hummed to life. And he drove away. The assault case moved forward over the next several months. Brittany pleaded guilty. Conditional discharge. 2 years probation. Mandatory anger management. Her lawyer argued stress. One-time incident. Out of character. The judge did not entirely agree, but accepted the plea. The elder abuse element was noted, though not charged separately. The financial investigation concluded with a different result. Attempted fraud, but no prosecution. Daniel's relationship to Robert, and the fact that no funds had been accessed, complicated the matter. The law sometimes hesitates where blood is involved. The bank permanently flagged Daniel's credentials. He would never again be able to approach those accounts. 5 letters arrived over 6 months. Apologies. Explanations. Financial hardship. Struggling commissions. Childcare expenses. Maternity leave adjustments. Reasonable words on paper. But Robert remembered the word cognitive. He remembered the pressure at the dinner table. He remembered the glass. He did not respond. The house changed after that. Not emptier. Quieter. Safer. He joined a book club at the community center. Began watercolor classes. The paintbrush felt awkward in his fingers at first, then natural. He met a widow named Patricia who laughed loudly and drank terrible coffee without apology. He booked a trip to Scotland. 3 weeks. Edinburgh. The Highlands. Isle of Skye. Sarah had always wanted to go. He would go alone. Last week, a drawing appeared in his mailbox. No return address. Inside was a crayon picture of a park. A man with gray hair. 2 small children holding his hands. Hearts floating around them. "I miss you, Grandpa." Emma's handwriting. Robert sat at the kitchen table and cried. But he did not call Daniel. Because love should never be used as leverage. Thompson had told him something once that stayed with him. Boundaries feel cruel to people who benefit from your lack of them. Robert understood that now. He was 63. He might have 30 years left. He might have 3, but they would be lived on his terms. The cameras still blinked quietly at night. The doors locked with a solid click. And every morning, he woke in his own bed. Not selfish, not paranoid, protected. Sometimes family means the people who love you unconditionally. Sometimes it means the people who love you only if you comply. Robert had chosen himself, and the cost of that choice had been steep. But the peace that followed, it was priceless. Peace does not arrive with applause. It arrives softly, in the absence of footsteps that no longer echoed down the hallway, in the silence of a phone that no longer vibrates with manipulation disguised as urgency, in the simple act of waking up and realizing no one is trying to take something from you. 6 months after Easter, the scar above Robert Chin's eyebrow had faded into a thin, pale line, barely visible unless you knew where to look. It rested there like punctuation, a period at the end of the sentence he had finally finished writing. The legal machinery had slowed. Brittany completed her first round of anger management sessions. Probation officers filed reports. Court documents were stamped and archived. Daniel stopped calling daily. The letters had become less frequent. Then stopped. Silence settled. But this silence felt different from the kind that had followed Sarah's death. That silence had been hollow, a vacuum of loss. This silence felt chosen, intentional, controlled. The house in North Vancouver no longer felt like a museum of memory. It felt like territory reclaimed. The maple tree in the yard had begun to bud again. Spring moved forward, indifferent to family fractures. Children from neighboring houses rode scooters down the sidewalk. Teslas hummed in and out of driveways like polite ghosts of modern wealth. Inside, Robert moved through his home differently now. Not cautiously, confidently. The cameras still blinked at night, small red dots in the corners of rooms. Not symbols of fear, but of awareness. Insurance against illusion. The living room had been rearranged. Sarah's ceramic Easter bunny was placed back into its storage box. The pastel decorations were gone. In their place sat a watercolor painting, Robert's first completed piece. It wasn't technically impressive. The sky bled too heavily into the hills. The perspective was slightly off, but it was his. A landscape inspired by a photograph of the Scottish Highlands. He had booked the trip the week after Brittany's plea. Edinburgh first, then the Highlands, then the Isle of Skye. 3 weeks. He told no one except Thompson and his financial advisor. When the plane lifted from Vancouver International Airport, Robert watched the coastline shrink beneath him. The water turned to silver threads. The land folded into distance. For the first time in years, he felt no pull behind him, no obligation, no tension, just forward motion. In Scotland, he walked cobblestone streets alone, ate dinners alone, stood at the edge of cliffs where the wind cut through him with clean precision. Sarah had always wanted to see the Highlands. He spoke to her there, not out loud, but in that quiet internal place where grief transforms into memory rather than ache. He told her he had protected what they built. He told her he had finally understood something she used to say often. You don't keep peace by sacrificing yourself. When he returned home 3 weeks later, the house welcomed him not as a burden, but as a base. There were no surprise visits, no negotiations waiting at the door, just stillness. And then one afternoon, a white envelope appeared in his mailbox. No return address. The handwriting was unmistakable. Emma. Inside was a drawing. Stick figures. A park. 3 smiling faces. Crayon hearts floating above. I miss you, Grandpa. The words were uneven. Earnest. Robert sat at the kitchen table and traced the lines with his finger. He allowed himself to cry. Not from regret, but from love. Love was never the problem. Manipulation was. He considered picking up the phone, just to hear her voice, just to tell her he loved her. But he knew how that would go. Daniel would answer. Brittany would hover. The conversation would be redirected into apology, into negotiation, into pressure. Emma would become a bridge they try to force him to cross. And Robert would not step onto that bridge, because he understood now that boundaries are not walls built to keep love out. They are gates built to keep exploitation from walking in. Thompson had advised him that when Emma turned 18, she could reach out independently, There would be no restraining orders then. No parental gatekeeping. 10 years. A decade of patience. Robert was 63. He had no guarantees. But he had something else. Peace. He joined a book club at the community center. The discussions were lively, occasionally heated, never manipulative. He found comfort in disagreement that did not threaten his autonomy. He continued watercolor classes. His skies improved. His lines steadied. Patricia, the widow with the sharp laugh and terrible coffee preferences, became a regular presence. They walked along the seawall some evenings, shared stories about spouses lost too soon. She never asked about his finances, never hinted at his house, never leaned forward with proposals disguised as concern. She simply listened. And sometimes that was enough. Daniel did attempt one more visit, properly scheduled, through Thompson's office. 48 hours notice. Daylight. Robert agreed. Daniel stood in the living room where the wine had once splashed the wall. He looked older, humbled. "We're managing," he said quietly. "We downsized, sold the Tesla, moved into a smaller place." Robert nodded. "And Brittany?" he asked. "She's working on herself." A pause. "I'm not asking for anything," Daniel added quickly. "I just wanted you to know." Robert studied his son carefully. For the first time, there was no pitch behind his words. No calculation. Just fatigue. "I hope you are," Robert said gently. They spoke for 45 minutes. Nothing explosive. Nothing transformative. Just two men navigating the fragile remains of something once simple. When Daniel left, he did not ask for keys. He did not mention spare bedrooms. He did not reference inheritance. That was progress. Small, but real. That night, Robert stood in his kitchen and poured himself a glass of red wine. He held it carefully, deliberately. He walked into the dining room, where the Easter dinner had collapsed. The hardwood floor bore no stain. The wall had been repainted. The table polished. No physical trace remained. He lifted the glass slightly, not in bitterness, not in revenge, but in acknowledgement, to boundaries, to survival, to the quiet strength it takes to choose yourself after decades of choosing everyone else. He drank slowly, set the glass down, turned off the lights, locked the doors, and went upstairs to sleep in his own bed, in his own home, under a roof he had protected. The cameras blinked softly in the darkness. Outside, the maple tree rustled in the night wind. Inside, Robertson slept peacefully, not because his family had changed, but because he had. And sometimes, that is the only victory that matters.